Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at chapter 3 here of PFT 110. It's our weight loss specialist class, or OPT for or Principles of Weight Management. But it's based on NASM's WLS certification. So we're going to go ahead and talk today a little bit about like the physiologic components of losing and gaining weight, because we are looking at the physiology of weight control today. So we want to be able to understand how the certain laws of science have a direct correlation with like how we control our weight, right? Like everything comes down basically to a little bit of math in the first law of thermodynamics, which is basically going to state that like, energy coming in can't be created or destroyed. So you either got to do something with it or you got to you got to put it somewhere. So we're going to be able to understand that. Then we'll be able to communicate that information to our clients in a ways that are effective and easy to understand. We are going to go ahead and look at in conditions of either like a calorie surplus or like an extensive calorie deficit, our clients are not going to be able to maintain a steady weight, right? Like that's the basic. If you forget everything about today, like the big thing we want you to remember is that like in order to understand weight loss or weight gain, you have to understand energy in versus energy out. If you want your weight to stay the same, then you need to consume an equal amount of energy to whatever amount of energy you're expending. If you want to gain weight, you need to consume more energy so that your body can build new stuff. And if you want to lose weight, you need to consume less energy. And we're going to measure that energy in the form of calories. And so basically everything that we're describing here is what we like to call energy balance. And so an increase or a decrease in body fat is going to result in either a surplus or a deficit of that energy. So if we're looking at this, right, energy balance. So weight control is an example of that, right? Like our ability to kind of maintain our weight, lose weight, whatever, all of that is an example of energy balance. And so when we're describing that, it's the relationship between energy in and energies out. So if you have like a positive energy balance, right, that's going to result in weight gain because you are consuming more calories than you are expending. And if you have a negative energy balance, that is going to result in weight loss. You are expending more energy than you are consuming. So your body has to tap into stored energy in order to make up for the lack of calories that you're giving it. Now, all of this is irrefutable. Like this is one of those things that sometimes, like when you explain it to people, you get a little bit of pushback. You're like, no. I've been on calorie deficit diets before. I've followed all the rules. I did everything I was supposed to. I've done keto. I've done Atkins. I've done this. I've done that. I've done everything I can to create a calorie deficit, and I still don't lose weight. So clearly, there must be something else at play here. Well, there really isn't. It's not that I don't believe somebody when they tell me like they've been on a diet and it hasn't worked. I absolutely believe them, but there are other things that explain where this is coming from rather than just like this. This is a law of like the universe we live in. This is basic physics, right? The amount of energy coming in is always going to equal however, if you're going to maintain your weight, it has to be equal to the amount of energy going out. So when you see somebody who has like maintained their weight, let's say like your client is complaining about the fact that like they've been on a diet and they haven't lost weight, right? It's like, I'm eating less energy than I was and I'm moving more than I was. Why am I not losing weight, right? Because that would, if you hear that, that's going to kind of make it sound like this is not true, right? It's like, I'm sticking on the calorie deficit as was designed by, the calculator that I used on the internet. I started moving more and, I should be creating this calorie deficit, but I'm still not losing weight. So what's going on there? Well, there's a lot of different factors that can explain that, right? Like sometimes it could be that they're not measuring enough things, right? If they're looking only at their weight and they're gaining muscle, you lose 1 pound of fat, gain 1 pound of muscle, your weight is going to stay the same. That could be a reason. Their perception of how much they are consuming could be off. That's a very, very common thing that we're going to see. If they're not measuring their portions very effectively, it's astounding how many calories you can get in such a short period of time, especially in the world that we live in, right, with a lot of nutritionally bankrupt food. Or maybe they're just not moving as much as they should be, right? Maybe because they are working so hard, they're not moving around in their normal life as often. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So, when we're talking about energy, we're going to use calories as our unit of measurement, right? So a calorie is nothing more than a unit of measurement that measures how much energy is in certain foods, right? So when we're talking about that, we're going to see, an inch represents like length, a second represents time, right? A calorie is not something that's like physical. It's just something that we use to kind of understand the universe we live in, right? They're a unit of measurement. So energy balance is going to be measured in calories. And so what a calorie is the amount of heat energy required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So if you were to put like a hamburger underneath like a beaker of water, and that water was 1 kilogram, right? And then you were to measure that as you like burned all of the energy in that burger up. Like let's say you light that burger on fire, right? And that burger burns all of its energy off, and the temperature in that water in that beaker that was above it, if that temperature raises by 350 degrees, right, in that 1 kilogram of water, that means that there are 350 calories in that burger. So, we're measuring heat energy there, but that's no different than what we do every single day. Like, we are turning calories into mechanical energy, right? Like I'm using it to move all my muscles around right now and like describe things, and the neurons inside of my brain, all the regular physiologic processes that are happening during digestion, all this other stuff that's happening inside of my body. All of my cells are burning energy in order to be able to do work. And so they're converting chemical energy into mechanical energy. And so when we describe like the first law of thermodynamics, right, which is what we're going to get to here, we are taking energy and converting it into work. So you can, the first law of thermodynamics is going to state that energy in any isolated system, in this case your body, will remain constant and cannot be recreated, although it may change forms. So you can't delete it, right? You can't just get rid, like your body can't just go, all right, well, I consumed 3,000 calories today, but I only moved around and did mechanical work for about 2,500 calories today. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that last 500. You can't really do that, right? I mean, I guess the only way you could is if you were just like able to superheat your body, but that doesn't really work that way, right? And so like you would lose a lot of calories doing that. But like you can. So instead, what happens when you have that leftover 500 calories, it has to get converted into a form of energy that can be used later. So we are going to turn calories into either glycogen or fat, and we're going to store those inside our body. And that way we have 500 calories worth of fat stored in some of our adipose cells in the form of like fatty acids, right? So let's look at an example. Let's look at an example of energy balance here, right? So let's say an individual, like somebody gets like a new job, and so they no longer are taking like the stairs every day, right? They got a new job, and so now where they're working, there are no stairs. That job is much less active as well. They took more of a desk job, whereas before they were on their feet, maybe walking back and forth. And so they're just burning 50 less calories every day than they used to be, missing out on like a couple flights of stairs. It's probably going to be 15, 20 calories. Sitting at their desk a little bit more, maybe that makes up another 25 calories. So for the most part, like let's say they're just burning 50 calories less per day. They're going to work 5 days a week, which means on average, like the way they're living their life, they're not burning 250 calories as many as they were like in their last job, right? So that's a 250 calorie deficit that they've now created, right? Which means that there's a 250 calorie surplus compared to their old lifestyle. Sorry, that wasn't clear. They're not burning 250 calories that they used to. So now there's just an excess. They're consuming the same amount of food that they're used to, right? Because that's kind of like how their internal mechanisms have kind of gotten used to things. And so they're still consuming the same amount of energy, but there's a 250 calorie difference now. Now, we know that there are 3,500 calories in about 1 pound of fat, right? So in as a little over 3 months, it may take them they're going to gain 1 pound of fat because of that positive extra 250 calories per day. So we can show our math here, right? So we know there's 350 calories in a pound of fat. So if we divide that by 250 calories per week, right? Because it's 50 calories a day. That's 250 calories every week. It's going to be about 14 weeks, and they will have gained 1 pound of fat just by losing 50 calories a day, right? And that kind of describes like what we're seeing there, right? Like that's an example of energy balance, right? So like 50 calories less every day, 5 days a week, that's a 250 calorie surplus that they have now. And then that adds up slowly over time. They're going to gain about a pound in about 3 months. That's 4 pounds in a year. Now, eventually, it's going to kind of all level out because, like, their body is going to be large enough that it will actually consume more energy now. And eventually, their weight will sort of plateau as long as they don't continue consuming more energy, right? But then on the flip side of things, like as that happens as we get older, our metabolism starts to slow down. And so maybe, if you lose 50 calories per day off of your metabolism, that's going to be a big difference there. And so all these things are examples of thermodynamics, right? So looking at that first law of thermodynamics and kind of understanding that, right? It states that energy in an isolated system remains constant and cannot be recreated. And so what they're saying there is that energy can change from one form to another, but it can't be created or destroyed as long as it's in like a closed system, you know? So in the human body, we can convert it into mechanical work, right? Which is what happens when you consume food. You usually get like a little energy boost. Or it can be converted into a storage form, typically in the form of like glycogen or adipose tissue. Now, if you damage your muscles, your body can also go, oh, okay, well, I'm going to convert all that energy and convert it into like new muscle tissue as well. But typically, like when we're looking at like the problems that people suffer from when it comes to like weight loss or weight maintenance rather, controlling their weight, it's because their body is consistently storing an excess of energy that they are consuming. So for the record, like one thing to remember about all of this is that the regulation of all this energy output is definitely under the control of like a lot of different parts of your metabolism. So a lot of people think that like your metabolism is simply the number of calories that you burn every day, and that is true. Like that is a big part of like what we're saying, but it's all mechanical. It's all chemical work that's taking place inside of your body. So there's a lot of different factors at play here. You've definitely got factors at play such as like your endocrine system, like understanding like how your hormones work. It's also under the control of just like regular cellular metabolism. If you are producing like a lot of stress hormones, for instance, like let's say you're producing like a lot of cortisol, maybe you're overtraining, you're working out too much, right? What can happen when you produce too much cortisol is your body will start to feel very run down, and it does that in such a way so that it will actually slow you down. It's actually trying to make you feel stress so that you will park it on the couch for a little while, read a book, watch your favorite TV show, and just take a night off, and that is going to result in like not burning as many calories as you would have been. And then sometimes that means you don't reach your fitness goals, which leads to stress. And now suddenly you're in like this really big cycle. So when we're looking at this, right, if we're looking at metabolism, in order to kind of measure this, right, one of the ways that we measure metabolism is we use what's called your basal metabolic rate, right? That's your BMR, and it describes the rate at which your body expends energy in order to maintain like itself, right? So this is the basic amount of calories that your body needs in order to survive and keep itself alive. Now, here's the thing, like sometimes people, when people hear that, they're like, oh no, like if I don't get enough, calories in my BMR, it's not like your body's gonna go and then you're done, like when your car runs out of gas, it stops running, right? And like, luckily that's not how we work. If we run out of gas, right? Let's say you consume less calories than you are expending in a day. Luckily, you've got all this stored energy inside of your body that your body can tap into. So, if my car runs out of gas, it's done. But if I run out of gas, my body can tap into my fat cells and come up with its own version, like that stored gas for later. It's like having an extra gas can attached to the back of your car. So when we're looking at like the laws of thermodynamics, right? In order for weight maintenance, we want our energy in to equal our energy out. And if we want to have weight gain, we want our energy in to be greater than our energy out. If we want to have weight loss, we want our energy in to be less than our energy out. And then energy in this case is what we're describing in the unit of calories. Now, we're going to typically use BMR. These terms, there's also another term called RMR, or resting metabolic rate. A lot of times, like these two get interchangeably used, which is totally fair. But they are technically different. Like the basal metabolic rate is super, super accurate. Like if it's measured in a lab where you do like a fast first so that like there's no residual like burning of food in there. And it's literally just like your body running itself. Whereas the resting metabolic rate estimates the rate at which the body expends energy to maintain physiologic function. So, you know, those are basically the same thing. But the difference here is that the resting metabolic rate is kind of measured in like a less strict way. So it's like, yeah, you can have lunch, you know, you can have breakfast. It's not a great idea to have like food right before you go take the test, because then your body's going to burn energy in response to like, you know, consuming that food. But that's kind of what we're describing there. And so the basal metabolic is the more accurate of the two. The resting metabolic is a little bit less accurate of the two, but still a very, very good measurement. And then ironically, a lot of times when we're doing formulas, which is math-based only and not taking into account any individual metabolic rates, that is also typically referred to as basal metabolic rate, because the assumption is that the formula is perfect, although we know that that is not accurate. So for the most part, when we're talking about basal metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate, it makes up the bulk of like how many calories you're going to burn every day, right? So for the most part, you're going to burn about 60 to 75% of your calories every single day, just passively by existing and keeping your body alive, right? So most of your energy is going to come from that. Now, the reason this is like such a large range here is because like a more active person is going to burn more energy through like thermic effective activity, and a less active person is going to burn, you know, primarily from their basal metabolic rate. And so let's say your basal metabolic rate is 1,500 calories, and you know you're tracking your calories using like a calculator or like a Fitbit or some type of app or something, and it says that you burned 1,920 calories in the day, right? Well, then 1,500 out of those 1,900, that's about like 75% of your energy, right? But let's say like you went to like a tennis tournament or something, you know, you went swimming, you went to the beach, had a big, super crazy active day, right? Well, now like that percentage is probably going to drop down. You're probably going to end up still burning the same basal metabolic rate, but then because of how active you were, you actually burned maybe 2,600 calories. So that percentage is definitely going to go down. So this is a general rule of thumb that we're seeing here, but it's not always perfect. So a good way to kind of develop a negative energy balance is to find ways to increase this metabolic rate, right? So if you can find a way to get your basal rate every day, which is most of your calories, right? If you can just make that number higher, that's a great way to just burn passive calories. This is why personal trainers are so obsessed with building as much muscle as possible with our clients, right? Especially when it comes to leg stuff, right? Like 60% of the muscle in your body is from your waist down. Like you have most of the muscle in your body in your legs. So if you can like make those giant muscles even bigger, they're just going to passively burn a little bit of extra energy all day. And so if your client's goal is weight loss and we pack on a couple of pounds of muscle on the legs, that's going to help them passively burn energy while they're watching TV, sitting at work, playing with their kids, you know, just passive extra energy all day long. And so that's one of our best sort of tips and tricks, if you will, for helping someone lose weight, is to kind of build muscle. Now, another part of like your daily energy burn is also going to come from the thermic effect of physical activity, or sometimes just referred to as the thermic effect of activity. And this is the estimated energy required to support the body during physical work outside of your BMR or RMR, right? So this is about 15 to 30% of your energy expenditure for the most part. Although again, if you are a much more active person, that number is going to go up, and you know it's going to drive all your other percentages down. So the more physically active you are, the greater that's going to be. Now, if you're a very active person and you're consistently developing excessive levels of post-exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC, right, which we've talked about in previous classes, that thermic effect of activity is going to be even higher, and you're going to continue burning even more energy passively. And then lastly, one of the biggest things we're looking at is also the thermic effect of food. And this is an estimation of how much energy is required to basically metabolize all your food, right? And so like certain diets do have a higher effective thermic activity than other ones. For instance, like protein. Protein is a very difficult macronutrient to break down, so your body expends a lot of energy breaking it down. And so a higher protein diet is going to result in a passive extra amount of calories being burned. Fiber is another example of that. Fiber is difficult for your body to break down, so it expends a little bit of extra energy working on it. We typically see like fat as being kind of easiest to break down, sugars being pretty easy, complex carbs being a little difficult, and then protein being the most difficult to kind of break down. And so that's one of the reasons why we not only want to focus on like nutrient dense foods, but when it comes to like understanding the energy expenditure, we also want to focus on good sources of protein, high fiber diets, and that can really assist in weight loss. And that's why you see those marketing claims. It's like promotes weight loss, eat your whole grain Cheerios. And it's like, okay. It's not untrue. So, in order to understand that, we do have all of our formulas here, right? We have a couple different formulas out there for estimating your energy expenditure, right? There's a lot of different formulas and calculators out there and stuff. And so all that's going to come down to like your target calories, right? And so one of the most simple formulas is going to be Harris-Benedict equation. This is sort of the most popular for a really long time. And basically, this is going to calculate your basal metabolic rate. You've also got the Mifflin-St. Jeor formula, which also calculates your basal metabolic rate. The Owens formula, which is going to take into account your weight a little bit differently. All these numbers, for the most part, are going to come out to basically the same thing. The numbers might be off a little bit here and there, but for the most part, these are pretty accurate. And then once you've got that, right, so that's going to calculate, that's going to take into account your regular like metabolism, right? But then you need to figure out like how much energy you're actually burning per day. So a lot of times you're going to multiply your basal metabolic rate by some type of activity factor in order to figure out your actual total caloric needs. So if you're sedentary, we're probably going to leave it alone, right? You're pretty much close to your basal metabolic rate. But if you're slightly active, right, maybe doing 30 to 60 minutes of like low intensity activity per day, right, we're going to multiply that number by a little bit more. And then if you are very active, we're going to multiply that by an even higher number. And if you're very, very, very active, we're going to multiply that by an even higher number. And so you can see like these multiple activity factor multipliers are basically going to show you how many extra calories you can burn every single day. I love highlighting this for my clients by just going, and showing them like what their lifestyle, like how many calories they burn in a sedentary lifestyle versus like a low active lifestyle versus a very active lifestyle. And it's great to see like, look, you get to eat more and more calories based on like how active you are, and so ensuring that you're getting, a little bit of activity every day, either before or after work, or maybe even just like during your lunch period, take the stairs, little things like that, get your steps in every day, all that stuff. Those are great ways to ensure that like you are getting as much activity as you need to. So once we've got all that, then we need to figure out like what our actual target calories are. And target calories are not necessarily always maintenance, right? Like all of that activity factor in those formulas, that got us to our maintenance calories, right? That helped us figure out how to get our body to stay the same. But if our goal is to increase our weight, or if our goal is to decrease our weight, we want to either consume more or consume less calories based on that maintenance number. And so again, if we kind of go back to our example of like, we know that there's a pound of fat in 3,500 calories, right? That's how many calories are required to kind of create 1 extra pound of fat. Once we've kind of figured out our basal needs, we can make adjustments from there, right? So we can either consume more or less calories. So for the most part, the US dietary guidelines, like when it comes to weight loss, should be slow and steady, right? Number one, that is going to ensure that it doesn't put the body into too much stress, which is going to create all those negative hormones, which will slow the metabolism down and usually result in a plateau. Number two, it's much easier to adhere to and ensure that they are getting enough actual nutrition in, They're not just focusing only on calories. They're still getting like nutritious meals in. And number three, it's going to give them enough energy to support effective workouts, which are going to help build muscle and in the long run result in a longer, more sustainable change. So we're going to focus on 1/2 to 2 pounds per week. Another really good rule of thumb is 0.7% of total body weight per week is another really like good rule of thumb to lose a certain amount of weight while minimizing muscle loss gains. So that's going to be, if we're aiming for 0.5 to 2 pounds per week, that's going to be about 250 to 1,000 calorie deficit per day, right? So if it's 250 calories per day over a 7-day week, that's going to come out to 1,750 calories. 1,750 calorie deficit, which is about a half a pound, right? That's half of 3,500. 500 calorie deficit would be 3,500 over the course of a 7-day week. 1,000 calorie deficit would be 7,000 calories over the course of a week, and so that'd be 2 pounds per week. So we can figure out like what rate we want to lose at by taking 3,500, dividing it by 7, and looking at how many calories that is per day to achieve like our weight loss. And so let's say we got Samantha over here, right? And so Samantha, her goal, she wants to lose 10 pounds, and she's got a 3-month deadline in order to be able to do that, right? So she burns an average of about 2,300 calories per day based on her current daily lifestyle, right? So we calculated everything out. I was like, all right, Samantha, like, what do you do? She's like, well, I usually like to go for a walk during lunch, and I'm relatively active, but I don't necessarily exercise very often. It's like, great, okay, that's really great information. So on average, she's fairly active, but not super active. And so she's burning about 2,300 calories every single day. Now, if we just wanted to like keep her on the exact same diet, we could totally do that and just create like a deficit, by making her move more. But in order to do that, she's going to need to burn probably 450 extra calories. She's going to need to burn 450 calories a day working out, which means, that's a pretty hefty amount of working out. And that's all on top of what she's already doing. That would bring her caloric burn up to 2,750 while she consumes 2,300. Not really the easiest thing in the world to do, right? So instead, we're going to use a combination of dieting and exercise, right? So again, she wants to lose 10 pounds over 3 months. What we're going to do is we're going to increase her caloric expenditure by about 250 calories every day, right? That's going to be an extra 1,750 calories every single week because she's doing it 7 days a week, right? And so Monday through Friday, we're going to have her on a simple strength training, or let's say Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we put her on a simple strength training routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have her do, a cardiovascular routine. And on the weekends, she just makes sure that she goes for like a walk at some point, a little bit longer than she would during her normal lunch break period. And so she gets a little bit of rest in there, right? And so that's going to create a 1,750 calorie deficit per week from from exercise alone. But again, 1,750 per week is not quite enough to get her to reach that 10-pound goal over the next 3 months. So we're also going to show her how to restrict her calories slightly by decreasing her caloric intake by about 200 calories per day. Right? So she's still, and rather than consuming 2,300, she's going to consume 2,100 calories per day. And that way, it's not going to be a huge difference that might derail her progress and be hard for her to stick to, but it will be enough to kind of create a little bit of a deficit there. And so that's going to be about 1,400 calories per week, right? Which is going to be, like I said, 200 calories per day, 7 days a week. That's 1,400 calories per week. So now if we look at like 1,750 from exercise plus 1,400 from diet, she's creating a negative deficit of 3,150 calories per week, right? Now we had 3 months to get her to lose 10 pounds. And so over the course of 12 weeks, right, at a deficit of 3,150 calories per week, it should result in about close to 11 pounds of weight loss over the course of that 12-week period, right? And here's how we can see that, right? 3,500 calories in a pound of fat, 3,150 times 12, that's 37,800 calories in deficit. She only needed 35,000 calories in deficit to get to 10 pounds, but 37,800 divided by 3,500, that's going to be 10.8. And so that's how many pounds we're going to see her lose. You might have to play that video, that part of the video back to kind of get all that. I hope I didn't move too fast for anybody. But that's how we're going to actually create that calorie deficit there with a combination of diet and exercise. And this is why it's so important to make sure that you're doing both. Exercise is great for creating a calorie deficit. And in this example, it was actually higher. But for the most part, it's much easier to create a deficit through like a healthy, easy, slow approach diet. Now, here's the thing. As Samantha like keeps losing weight, right? Her body is actually getting lighter and she's burning less energy passively, right? Because she doesn't have as much tissue and as many cells to run now, her body's actually going to start burning less energy. So this is what we refer to as part of the set point theory. And the set point theory is basically going to state that like the body is going to resist changes to its composition. It doesn't want to lose weight, right? Your body's always preparing to be stuck on a deserted island, right? Which is why whenever it gets extra calories, it's going to store those extra calories on your stomach or thighs or back of the arms or whatever, right? That's sort of the places that your body likes to hoard little bits of extra energy because it's like, all right, I've seen Gilligan's Island, if we're ever out on a 3-hour tour and I get trapped, I'm going to have plenty of energy to like survive, right? And that's all well and good, except that like our bodies tend to store way more energy than it's ever going to need, right? So now let's say you start losing weight, your body goes, okay, like I was prepared for this, great, I'm able to kind of tap into that fat store, those energy stores and like reduce it. But the thing is, remember that's like your body's emergency fund, right? I'm sure people watching this video, you have savings, you have emergency funds, right? And so it's not comfortable to tap into those things, right? Like anytime I have to like anytime something goes wrong with my paycheck or if there's a bank account problem and it's like, I have the money in my savings that I can tap into it, but it's like, I'll do anything to resist like tapping into that. You're not really, I get penalized for tapping into it, right? Like your body's going to create cortisol, whatever you tap into, and so your body doesn't prefer to do this. And so that's kind of an example of like what's happening with the set point theory. Your body resists this change, which is why we don't want to lose weight too quickly. Because when we lose weight really, really rapidly, what ends up happening is our body goes into, it's like, see, we're on the deserted island. I knew it. And so then anytime it gets surplus energy, it's going to go right back to storing it. It gets programmed to literally get better at storing energy because we have kind of sent the signal that like, hey, we aren't getting enough energy, right? So your body will resist composition changes by decreasing its activity. Now, one of the ways that it does this is through what is called, and by the way, like it's not that I don't believe the set point theory exists, but I love that there's this line here. It has been criticized by some people as like fostering an idea of like fatalism, right? Like, oh, well, I guess I can never reach my goals because my body's resisting it, right? Just because your body is resisting it doesn't mean that like we can't create sustainable changes over time. A lot of people, when they hear this and they hear like, oh, I ruined my metabolism, that's not necessarily true, right? It just means that like, we need to be aware of like the way that our bodies are responding to this set point. And then we need to come up with a different strategy to overcome it. Some people, it's going to be an eating thing. Some people, their body is going to go, whoa, we're losing energy. And so it's going to trigger hunger hormones. And so their big struggle is going to be hunger. Some people, they're just going to lose energy and they're going to be like, oh, I just can't. I'm so tired. I'm exhausted. And they got to find another way to kind of burn some passive energy. But it doesn't mean that like we can't come up with a winning strategy. It just means that it's something that we need to be aware of so that we can come up with a winning strategy. So that is why like sometimes it's criticized. And I'm actually personally part of that group as well. I don't really like to talk to my clients too much about the set point theory, just because it does kind of send the wrong signal as if like, hey, like this is a big mountain to overcome, So what are some things that kind of explain the set point theory? Well, one of them is energy gaps, right? Energy gap is pretty easy to understand. We already kind of talked about it a little bit. It's as people lose weight through energy restriction, right? So through calorie restriction, your body is going to require less energy to run. And that's your quote unquote slower metabolism. It's not that like your cells have been programmed, like it's not like you ruined the cells within your body and now they're not producing energy the same way. It's just that there's less cells to produce energy, and or those cells are smaller, and so they don't need as much energy to survive anymore. And so this is going to be somewhere close to about 8 calories per pound. So let's say you lose 20 pounds, right? That's going to be 160 calories that you are burning less per day. And look at what happened earlier. I mean, look at our example up here in our client who was, having a 50-calorie difference just from changing their job. That resulted in a pound over the course of 14 weeks. And so this is why we do see like yo-yo dieting, right? Like people will lose a little bit of weight and then they'll slowly gain it back. That's an example of energy gap. Some of it is also through non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is more commonly referred to as NEAT. We're going to talk a lot more about NEAT later on in this course, actually. But this is the number of calories that you're going to burn throughout the day from like normal everyday activities, right? Bouncing your leg, fidgeting, those tend to be things that actually burn a passive amount of energy that we don't really tend to think about, right? If you're the type of person who's just like watching TV and bouncing around a lot, or you tend to be kind of fidgety, or you're up on your feet. I mean, like even me, like I have a standing desk here, right? Like this is burning a little bit more energy than if I was sitting down. And if I was sitting upright, that would burn a little bit more energy than if I were like laying on my bed, right? So that's going to be your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's like the thermic effect of activity, but it's rather than activity from like exercise, it's activity from just living your life. So individuals on diets can actually decrease their NEAT without realizing it. Your body goes, oh, we're not getting enough energy. I'm going to trigger some hormones to kind of slow us down. And so maybe you get tired in the middle of the day, and then you just don't feel like going for that lap around the lake, during your lunch break, or maybe you just don't feel like taking the stairs. All those things make a big difference over the course of time. We're also going to see things like hyperplastic obesity, which is actually just the production of more fat cells. And so sometimes, like when we lose a massive amount of weight and then we gain some of that weight back, your body, rather than filling up old fat cells that it has, it'll actually create new fat cells, which means you have new adipose cells that are more likely to want to store energy. Or like maybe your body, it doesn't replace muscle with fat. I mean, that's not how it works, right? Like those are two different types of tissues. But say you lose muscle because you aren't like, using it. And muscle is very much on the principle of if you don't use it, you lose it. And then your body sort of like decides, okay, well, I'm still getting enough energy, but it doesn't build up new muscle tissue because it doesn't need to. So instead, it burns a more metabolically efficient cell in the form of like fat cells. And then we do see metabolic efficiency, which is a decrease in metabolism that's associated with weight loss. And so this is actually your body burns less energy to slow down your weight loss progress, right? Now, there's a lack of agreement on how much this actually happens. Like a couple years back, there was a big study that was done on contestants from the show The Biggest Loser, and a lot of those contestants regained a significant portion of their weight back. And they described it as that they slowed their metabolisms down. Now, me personally, I'm not really 100% sold on the concept of slowing your metabolism down. But I do believe that like you can get slowed down through things like decreased NEAT and energy gap and stuff like that. And if you don't change your habits, you only change your body composition, it's going to result in eventually like regaining that weight, because nothing gets the way it is unless it's designed to get that way. And so if you design a lifestyle, if you have like a new body, but you're putting that body through a design of an obese lifestyle, that's going to change your composition slowly back. Or slowly over time. So what are some of the causes of obesity that we're going to look at? Obviously, genetics play a really big role here, right? We do know that like certain people have a predisposition for a certain body type, whether you believe in the ectomorph, endomorph, mesomorph science, or if you just believe that like your genes are pre-programmed to burn calories in a very specific way. We do know that like your genes are going to play a big role here. But again, just because like, let's say just for the sake of argument, you've got, your goal is to lose weight and you just don't have the greatest weight loss genes in the world. that is a bummer, and your hill is a little steeper than someone else's. But at the end of the day, we know that the first law of thermodynamics describes how we can lose weight. So it just means that we have to come up with a different plan. You know, a lot of times when people talk about genetics, that's another example of like fatalism, right? People often use that as a way of saying, oh, well, I can't reach my goals, I should just give up. And we know that that's not true, right? All we have to do is change the design, right? Yeah, your formula is going to be a little bit longer, and that's tough, and that is hard, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. Just like my road, let's say I want to be a millionaire. I do not come from a background of wealth. My formula needs to be a little bit longer if I'm going to get there. Some people, they get $1 million loans from their parents. And so their journey to becoming a millionaire is like that. So it doesn't matter like what your journey is. It just matters like how you design it. You can get there through a cleverly designed and like hard work program. Our causes of obesity can also be related to our levels of hunger or satiety. So when we're describing hunger, right, hunger are sensations that promote like, the intake of food, right? You're hungry, therefore you go consume food. The opposite of hunger is going to be your level of satisfaction. We're going to refer to this as satiety, right? And satiety are the sensations of satisfaction that determine your level of hunger. If you have low satiety, you're going to have high hunger. And that's why, typically foods that are very, very high in sugar will give you a big burst of energy, but they'll result in a lot of hunger later on because they have low levels of satiety. Whereas foods that are high in like fat, healthy fats and proteins and fibers, those have high levels of satiety. So you're less likely to need to eat as often if you're consuming foods that result in higher satiety. Two of the hormones that affect this, by the way, are called leptin and ghrelin. Leptin is a protein that your body creates whenever it wants to signal like, all right, cool, we got enough food, right? If anybody has ever heard, they say like you should chew your food because it gives your gives your brain time to communicate with your stomach and realize that it's consumed food. And so then it can start producing anti-hunger hormones. There's actually a pretty good amount of science to support this. Now, I'm not saying you have to like sit there and like chew your food really rapidly, but like we do know that people who tend to like inhale their food really quickly, which unfortunately I tend to be one of those people, people who inhale their food really quickly tend to create less levels of leptin because their body doesn't really have time to realize how much food it actually consumed. So there's a lot of tricks to getting your body to create more of this protein. And so finding ways to do this can help you stick to a diet because you'll feel satisfied much, much more often. Whenever you hear somebody describe like you should eat 6 meals a day, right? They're talking about like 3 big meals and like 3 snacks. And that's the best way to like maintain your diet. A lot of times you'll hear people say this very faux science sentence where they'll say it stokes your metabolism, like throwing, little logs on the fire consistently. That is not how metabolism works, but it is actually how your hunger works. And so if you are continually stoking leptin production and keeping your body satisfied, that can result in less calories consumed overall, which will result in weight loss. Not because you changed your metabolism, right? You didn't burn any extra energy doing this, but you did keep yourself from consuming massive amounts of energy in response to hunger. Now the other, there's a lot of like I said, frequent snacks is a really good way to do this. Eating off a plate is another good way to do this. It's very interesting, but we do know that like when your body sees food disappear, it actually produces leptin in response, which is why they've done some really interesting studies where they have actually given groups of people a certain amount of food, and then they've tricked them by filling more of that food up so their brain does not see that food disappear. And those people who consumed more food actually described being hungrier after the meal was over compared to the other group that actually consumed less food. Because their brain did not see it disappear, they consumed more food, and because they never produced any of that leptin. So eating off a plate can show your brain that food is disappearing, and that can make a really big difference. And even just tricking your brain into thinking that you were eating a fuller meal, this is one of the reasons why the My Plate actually wants you to consume half of your plate in fruits and vegetables. It adds bulk to your diet while not adding massive amounts of calories or energy, right? So it's a much easier way to create that energy deficit by producing higher levels of leptin. Now, the opposite of leptin, by the way, is ghrelin, and that's the hormone, that's the protein that your body creates to signal hunger, actually. And it's pretty easy to remember ghrelin because it's like your stomach is growling, right? So that's a big cause for obesity. There's also hormonal difference. We do know that hormones play a big role in your metabolism, right? And so, for instance, triggering like stress hormones can actually slow your metabolic rate down, but they also govern like how active you are. And so again, like creating like consistent stress hormones can cause you to go into like a fight or flight mode, which will cause you to burn less energy passively, but then it will also trigger you to kind of be a little more sedentary and a little more closed off, and you'll move less often, which also burns less energy. And so there's definitely a connection between hormones there as well. And we do know that some people have a predisposition for creating those stress hormones, and they have a predisposition for being the type of person who moves less. It's okay if that person, if you happen to be that type of person, or if your client happens to be that type of person, we just need to be aware of it and counteract that by coming up with a plan that makes it easy and approachable for them to increase their movement, right? And then the last one here is environment. And environment is huge. We are all products of the environments that we grew up around, right? And so it plays a huge part in your ability to either create an energy surplus or create an energy deficit, right? Many populations, especially here in the US, live in an area where it is very easy for us to get an abundance of food, and we all have an abundance of technology. I mean, we got this thing right here that allows us to just sit on the couch and watch our favorite movies, without even having to go into the other room, and so that's going to result in less energy expenditure. And so environment affects things like how often you're going to consume fast foods. This is one of the reasons why we actually see more obesity in poorer neighborhoods, because there are more fast food restaurants in areas like that. Supersized meals is a big part of that. More sugary beverages. Education level is huge. Like simply not knowing like about healthy foods is absolutely a predictor of like weight gain. We know that like if your education level is lower, it is more common that we will see like overweight individuals because they just simply didn't learn about like healthy nutrition at an early age, or they weren't around it, they weren't exposed to it. I mean, I'm an example of that. I grew up in I was told milk is the healthiest thing in the world every single day because I come from like an area where there are lots of dairy farmers. And now like I know that like there are a lot of hormones added to our milk. There's lots of natural sugars in them. That they're very high in saturated fats and cholesterols. And so like, those are things that I wasn't aware of until I learned about them. And so that's a big part there. Decreased physical activity, media exposure, socioeconomic factors, like if you cannot afford healthy foods or afford to take time out of your schedule to like meal prep or take time out of your schedule to exercise. Cognitive stimulation, we know the way people think about things has a lot to do. And then even the weight loss industry here, I got this, I added this in bold actually, but the weight loss industry is a big part of this. We're constantly told that there are these supplements that you can take that can replace you having to be quite as active. And we just simply know that like that approach has been shown time and time and time and time and time again to be ineffective. So we do know that obesity is definitely driven by our environment and encourages overeating, and an environment that discourages activity. We have had people with no biologic reason to develop physiologic control. And so that often results in positive energy balances. And we know that positive energy balances are going to result in weight gain. And so all of that is great for us to be aware of, because now that we know it, right? Now that we know it, we can tell our clients, and once our clients know, we can come up with a plan to kind of counteract some of these things, right? We can come up with an action plan to address any of this. And so individuals, we can control our weights and our energy expenditures through our activity level and daily choices. So that is the physiology of weight control. That is chapter 3 of your WLS specialist manual. Check out homework 1 up on Canvas today, and I will see all you guys tomorrow.